Welcome back to the 6 Yard Line podcast. I'm Noel. Just to do a little bit of an update on the Nottingham Forest situation, it's been a hectic week in the Nottingham Forest world. As with any time supporting Forest over the last couple of years, it's full of news and full of intrigue. So this week, obviously, the big news of the week was obviously the re-signing of Morgan Gibbs-White after the whole Tottenham debacle with the buyout clause and all the who did what behind the scenes. We have now got essentially Morgan Gibbs-White for another couple of years. Now, one thing I would say is this looks like a kind of a deal like Manchester United kind of had with Ronaldo, where he wanted to leave, and then United said, look, stay one more year, and then we'll let you go where you want to go. And I do generally kind of think that's what this is. I also think it's a little bit more about, Forest getting some more money for him than the 60 million buyout clause that was in his contract, which has obviously now been removed with this new deal. So I think it's good for the player because at the end of the day, like, he's going to get into a European competition with Forest. I think he'll do well in that European competition. I think it'll help him get into the England squad. I do think it might hinder him a little bit because obviously Thomas Tuchel's obsessed with having everyone playing in the Champions League because that's Tuchel, and let's be honest, Tuchel's a bit of an idiot anyway. So I just think it's a good deal for everybody. Forest don't want to lose a player like Morgan Gibbs-White, but I do think what Forest have done this week is try and find a replacement for him. And James McAtee looks like the kind of player that you can build a team around. He's 21 years old. I think Man City's holding out for Cole Palmer money, which is 45 million. Forest bid 25 million. They're quite a ways apart. I do think he's probably worth 30, 35. If Elliot Anderson is a good example. If Morgan Gibbs-White is an example, we paid 35 million for him. So I do generally think that, if for McAtee to spend 35 million, we've got the money. We got the Anthony Elanga money. We definitely do have the money from the other outgoings that Forest have done this year. And there's been a lot of really good business. At the end of the day, Danilo's gone for 18 million. There's a few others that really kind of help rack up the income and the revenue for Forest on the sales side of it. So, McAtee would be an absolutely massive recruitment. I think he's somebody you can build your team around, and then obviously put a very high buyout clause in that contract. I would assume Man City has a buyback clause on Cole Palmer, and I would assume that they would probably want a buyback clause on McAtee as well. And having said that, at the end of the day, you just saw them do the same with James Trafford. They had a match for match deal. So Newcastle bid, I think, 27 million, and that's what Man City bid back. So City sold him for 14. They spent an additional 13 to get him back. So the 27 million, it's a good deal for them. So, I think that's, a positive step if Forest are trying to find someone like that to kind of come in and have a replacement for Gibbs-White while still keeping Gibbs-White for one more year, because I think that's what it kind of comes down to. Now, the Gibbs-White Marinakis interview, I've seen a lot of the comments, and I've seen a lot of the Talk Sports of the world talking about how weird it is. It's a little weird. Marinakis is clearly a very dominant person, clearly a very intimidating guy, and Morgan probably looked a little bit uncomfortable at times during that one, so it's pretty funny. Just what else can you say, right? You just gotta laugh about it, right? So anyway, Gibbs-White here, I think it's a good move. If you get McAtee, that's a bonus. I think it'd be fantastic. Obviously, Forest did make a big signing this week. Dan Ndoye from Bologna. I don't know much about him, I'll be honest. I've watched a fair few videos on him this week because, a lot of people have made the comparisons to Anthony Elanga. He's a good replacement. He's played in a decent team at Bologna. And he looks like, from what I've seen on the videos, from what I've looked and read and kind of gone through some people that, know a little bit about him, he seems like he's got a huge upside. And a guy that, could really do with being in a team like Forest. And I think this is a great move. I think the cost isn't outrageous. And I think, the other rumor is out there that Forest are going to try and get Diama Traore back from Fulham. I guess that, he had a good time, obviously, with Wolves and Nuno back in the day. And I think he would be kind of the backup to Ndoye. And I think he would be back up to Hudson-Odoi as well, because I think he play left and right. So, again, I think that's more about strength and depth that Forest lacked at times last year. Now, they've obviously had Ramon Sosa. They've sold him this year. So, again, there was money there from that deal. So, I think if you sell Elanga and then you sell Sosa and then you bring in Ndoye and Traore as backup and replacement, I think it's a pretty good like for like. Time will obviously tell if that's true or not, but Anthony Elanga's, he had a fantastic season for Forest, and there's no doubt in that would be very difficult to replace. But I think Forest's recruitment has been, over the last couple of years, one of the best in the Premier League. If you look at the Milenkoviches, the Murillos, Igor Jesus, the new forward, looks very good as well. So you kind of have to trust that they are, the recruiting department's has got their plans and they're going to do it to the way that they feel and bring in players that they think fit the system. And they've not got it wrong. And quite a few transfers. Obviously, Elliot Anderson's another one that's an absolute slam dunk. You can sit here and name them all. So, McAtee looks, I do generally think he looks like a top-notch player. So, again, if you can get these guys in at a relatively low cost, make sure you stay within PSR and all those rules that are there to keep us in our place, apparently. I think it's going to be another good off-season for Forest, but I would like them to strengthen a couple more spots. I do feel that, there is a couple of positions that, if you get interest that you don't want to be struggling. And I think towards the end of the season, Forest's lack of rotation cost them a Champions League spot. And, that's what's going to happen. So hopefully they reinvest that money and get some players back in. But it's been a good week for Forest. And at the end of the day, like when you sit down and look at what they've done in the transfer window, you look at who they brought in. Yeah, it's not Liverpool, it's not Arsenal, Chelsea in terms of bringing in 6, 7, 8 guys and, spending 200-300 billion pounds on players. We don't have the PSR capacity for that. But I think the transactions Forest are making, I think, are very good at this point. And I do feel that, they could be a good mid-table team with some solid build. And obviously it depends on what European competition Forest are in. I think if they're in the Conference League, I think they are one of the favourites to win it. If they're in the Europa League, you kind of hope they get to a quarterfinal, semi-final. But again, it just depends on where that decision lies. I think it's August 11th that gets settled. To be honest with you, I don't really care at this point. I think there's pros and cons for both of those tournaments. I think if you're in the Champions League, it's a bit different than the Europa League and the Conference League. But hey, you know what? European football's at the City Ground next year, and I don't see a bad thing about that in any way, shape, or form. So it just depends on what they choose. To be honest, I'm just overall the Palace fans bagging on Marinakis and co. He's going to do what's right for his club. And I think a lot of the negativity on Marinakis, particularly lately, I just find, it's petulant, right? At the end of the day, we watch a lot of soccer. We listen to a lot of podcasts. We listen to a lot of teams. Both me and Sean all the time watch a lot of content of other people, other fans, of the supporters. And one of the biggest things you hear about, the complaints all the time, is about their ownership. You look at Manchester United's owners, non-existent, don't put their own money into the club. They take from the club. You look at, again, you can go down the list of all the clubs that just don't invest in their team because they just want the status quo. They want to stay where they are. They don't want to put their money where their mouth is. And hey, you know what? Mr. Marinakis puts his money where his mouth is. And, is he a certain way? Yeah. Is he there to upset the major players in the Premier League? Absolutely, because what he wants Nottingham Forest in the top 6. He wants Nottingham Forest to be challenging for titles. He wants them to be a big club. And he wants to challenge the status quo that's in the Premier League. And a lot of the pundits, a lot of the media, there's a lot of the other clubs don't want that. They want their status quo. They want their big ticket paydays from TV revenue. They don't want a jump start to, get up there and break it up. They say they do. They don't. And, I think if you look this week, a lot of the Newcastle fans, Newcastle's owners are some of the richest in the world, if not the richest in the world. And they've got to sell players to free up money for PSR to buy players. I just think it's bonkers. Like, you've got the richest owners in the world that can't spend their money, but a team that finished 15th and a team that finished 17th can spend more than the team that finished 4th. It's just the Premier League's rules aren't fit for purpose. Me and Sean will do a show on that soon because I find PSR is just a joke at this point, and I do find it, highly entertaining that you kind of sit there and look at the level playing field, and it's not really a level playing field. So, it's PSR for you. But, from an owner standpoint, I think Mr. Marinakis has done everything he said he would do, and, people aren't going to like that, and he's going to upset an awful lot of fans, and so be it. That's what happens. Manchester United have that expression, hated, adored, but never ignored. I think that kind of comes with success. And I think what Forest have had over the last couple of years is success in terms of moving up. Has that turned into trophies and that stuff? No, but in terms of where they are in the league, where they were, where they've been, Marinakis has taken them from the championship, bottom of the championship, to, they were third for most of the season in the Premier League. And that's a success. If you look at the players that they're bringing young, talented players to grow and develop, and they don't want to be a selling club. And that's the whole Morgan Gibbs White argument right now, is they don't want to be a feeder club for the top 6. They want to be a top 6 team themselves. And that means when you have an owner that's willing to put his hand in his pocket and pay guys to stay as opposed to guys leaving, he will. The challenge is obviously PSR and all the rules regarding that, which are geared to maintaining a status quo with certain teams having a certain amount of money. When I look at Chelsea, just signing. Right now, we were looking at it this morning, they've got three more potential deals to do. And it's like, yes, they're selling well. They sold João Felix, but the amount of players that they have on their squad, I think João Felix, when he left, was number 40. So, they've still got a massive squad. And I looked down that list yesterday of the Chelsea squad and go through all the players and look at what there's players there that would start on most Premiership teams. And I think teams like Fulham, Forest, Villa are going to have to look at those teams and look at that team like Chelsea and try and buy some of those players, because I think you might get a deal. Obviously Forest got Callum Hudson-Odoi, which was an absolute steal for $3 million. So again, there is opportunity, but again, it's PSR, and here's the PSR rules, and we just have to abide by it and try and build a team